Racist cop attacks black woman in court. She's his incoming police chief. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Officer Jack Turner had always considered himself a person of authority. As a seasoned police officer, he had earned his place within the system, a position he was proud of. But in truth, it wasn't just his skill that had kept him there. It was the unspoken protection that came from his status. The same protection that allowed him to look down on people like Rachel Johnson. He had seen her rise through the ranks, but to him, she was just another obstacle. Someone who didn't belong in the circles of power. Rachel, on the other hand, had fought tooth and nail to get where she was. As a black woman in law enforcement, she had to work twice as hard, proving herself at every turn. The road had not been easy, but Rachel was no stranger to adversity. Despite the hurdles, she had made it clear to her colleagues and to the community that she was determined to break barriers. That determination would soon place her in a position of power, one that Jack Turner could never have imagined. It was a typical courtroom setting. Lawyers in crisp suits, the sound of papers shuffling, the faint murmur of spectators. But today was different. Jack had been called to testify in an ongoing case, one that was receiving attention not just for the details of the case, but for the key players involved. Rachel was also present, watching closely as she prepared for her upcoming promotion. She was set to become the new police chief, a position that would place her in charge of the very officers who had once dismissed her. Jack Turner had been under scrutiny for his behavior in the past, his repeated incidents of racial profiling and his hostile attitude toward anyone who wasn't like him. Rachel knew about these incidents, of course. She had seen firsthand the challenges her community faced at the hands of people like Jack, and that was exactly why she had worked so hard to reach this moment. As the hearing went on, Jack couldn't help but notice Rachel in the courtroom, sitting there with an air of confidence that irritated him. He had heard the rumors, of course, about her upcoming promotion. The idea of her taking charge, especially after all the things he had said about people like her, felt like a slap in the face. His disdain was palpable, and it seemed to grow with every passing minute. Rachel, on the other hand, remained composed. She didn't flinch at Jack's gaze or the tension in the room. This was nothing new for her. She had dealt with much worse in her career and had always risen above it. But today there was something different. Today, she was no longer the woman fighting to be heard. She was about to become the woman who would hold the power. She was about to be his boss. The courtroom was still, the tension thick in the air. Rachel Johnson sat silently, her focus sharp as she watched Officer Jack Turner. His posture was tense, his every movement betraying the frustration that was simmering just beneath the surface. The sound of the gavel echoed as the judge called for a brief recess, allowing the crowd to stir in low whispers. But Rachel remained still, her thoughts already drifting to what lay ahead. She had been preparing for this moment for years, and today, more than ever, she could feel the weight of her impending promotion bearing down on her. As the soon-to-be appointed police chief, she would be responsible for overseeing every officer in the department, including those who had doubted her ability to rise this high. But it wasn't just about power. It was about change. It was about showing that a woman, and a black woman at that, could achieve what many thought was impossible. Jack Turner, however, wasn't ready to accept that reality. He had built his career in an environment where his opinions were often unchecked, his views on race and authority rarely questioned. Rachel's rise threatened to topple the unspoken hierarchy that had existed for so long, and he couldn't stomach the thought of answering to someone he viewed as inferior. The recess felt long for Rachel, but she knew better than to show any sign of impatience. She was calm, collected as always. Her journey had not been an easy one. She had faced countless obstacles, discrimination, doubt, and ridicule, but none of that had ever stopped her. It had only fueled her determination to prove everyone wrong. And now, as the clock ticked down to the moment when she would officially step into the role of chief, she could feel the eyes of the entire room on her. She knew Jack was watching, probably wondering how she had managed to get this far. But the reality was, Rachel didn't need to explain herself to him. She had earned every inch of the respect she was about to command. The court session resumed, and Rachel's attention returned to the case at hand. Jack took the stand, his voice low as he answered questions from the defense. His body language was stiff, as though he was trying to maintain control, but his gaze kept flicking toward Rachel. It was clear that he wasn't just uncomfortable with the proceedings, he was uncomfortable with her presence. When the prosecutor called for a break, Rachel stood and made her way toward the back of the courtroom, her movements deliberate and confident. As she passed by Jack, she could feel his eyes following her, a mixture of anger and disbelief behind them. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Rachel was fully aware of the significance of this moment. Her ascension to the position of police chief wasn't just a personal victory. It was a symbol of the changes that were already underway within the department. It was a message to everyone, including officers like Jack, that the system was no longer as it once had been. It was no longer a place where certain people could hide behind their biases and continue to wield unchecked power. Rachel would bring change, and she would do it with the same quiet strength that had carried her this far. Jack Turner might not have realized it yet, but his days of authority were numbered, and soon he would answer to Rachel, not the other way around. It was early morning when Rachel Johnson received the call that would change everything. The notification of her official promotion to police chief had been expected, but the weight of the moment still hit her with full force. As she looked out the window of her small office, her mind raced with thoughts of what this would mean for the department and for her future. For years, she had worked tirelessly to prove her worth, to break the mold of what a police chief should look like. And now, she was about to take that final step. The implications of her new role were immense, but it wasn't just about the title. It was about the shift in power, the undeniable truth that change was coming. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of pride that she had made it this far. But she also knew that this was just the beginning. The phone rang again, snapping Rachel from her thoughts. It was a call from the mayor's office, confirming the ceremony details. The mayor, a longtime supporter of her cause, would be present to officially announce the promotion later that day. As Rachel made her way to the ceremony, her mind couldn't help but drift back to the courtroom, back to Officer Jack Turner. She hadn't forgotten the way he had looked at her, the way his eyes had burned with resentment and disbelief. It was clear that Jack didn't understand how she had reached this point. To him, she was still just an outsider, someone who didn't belong in positions of power. And yet, Rachel had fought for this. She had worked her entire career to prove that someone like her could succeed. As the ceremony began, the room was filled with familiar faces, officers she had worked with for years, along with some new faces, eager to see what kind of leader she would be. Rachel stood tall at the front of the room, her nerves steady despite the magnitude of the moment. The mayor spoke highly of her accomplishments, acknowledging her dedication to justice, equality, and community outreach. There was a round of applause, but Rachel knew that not everyone in the room was truly happy for her. Officer Jack Turner was present, of course, standing in the back, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. The look on his face was hard to read, but Rachel could feel his animosity. As she stepped forward to take the oath, she caught his eye for a brief moment. There was no smile, no sign of congratulations, just a cold, calculating stare. She could feel the weight of that gaze, but she refused to let it shake her. This was her moment, and no one, not even Jack, could take that from her. After the ceremony, as the crowd began to disperse, Rachel was approached by several of her colleagues who congratulated her on her promotion. She exchanged pleasantries, but her mind kept drifting back to Jack. She knew that, despite her victory, there were still battles ahead. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be resistance, challenges, and moments when she would question herself. But Rachel was ready. She had come this far because she had never given up, and she wouldn't start now. She would prove Once and for all, that change was possible. No one could stop her, not even Jack Turner. It had only been a week since Rachel Johnson officially became the new police chief, but the transition had already proven to be far from easy. As she walked through the department's halls, she could feel the eyes of her officers following her. There were polite smiles and congratulatory handshakes, but there was something deeper, an undercurrent of skepticism, of doubt. Officer Jack Turner, though he had not yet spoken a word directly to her, had made his feelings clear in his actions. He seemed to be intentionally avoiding her, but it wasn't difficult to tell that he didn't respect her position. Jack had been one of the longest-serving officers in the department, and his reputation for enforcing the law with an iron fist was well known. Rachel knew that many of her colleagues looked up to him, not just because of his seniority, but because of his approach to policing, an approach that often aligned with outdated, sometimes questionable practices. That was why Rachel had been brought in. She was there to shake things up, to bring change to a system that had become too comfortable with its old ways. But that kind of change was never easy, especially when you had to face the resistance of someone like Jack. As the days passed, Rachel found herself increasingly navigating delicate situations, constantly aware that her every move was being scrutinized. One afternoon, as she reviewed reports in her office, there was a knock on the door. It was Lieutenant Marcus Grant, one of the few officers who had shown her genuine support from the beginning. "Chief, there's a situation I think you need to be aware of," he said, his voice low. Rachel looked up, her expression calm but alert. "What's going on, Marcus?" "It's Turner," Marcus continued, his eyes glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "He's been causing some problems with a new protocol you put in place. I've already had a few officers come to me, saying that he's refusing to follow orders." Rachel's brows furrowed. She had expected some pushback, but this was more than she had anticipated. She took a deep breath, then nodded slowly. "What kind of problems?" "Nothing violent," Marcus replied. "Just insubordination. He's been taking matters into his own hands, disregarding the directives you set out. It's not a huge issue yet, but it could escalate if we don't address it." Rachel stood up from her desk, her mind already racing with possible solutions. "Thank you for bringing this to me. I'll handle it," she said, her voice steady. As she walked to the elevator, her thoughts drifted back to Jack. She had known that confronting him would be inevitable. But now, it seemed like the time had come sooner than she expected. She couldn't afford to let things slide. She had to show that she was in control, that her authority was not something to be challenged. When the elevator doors opened, Rachel stepped out onto the floor, her gaze searching for Jack. She found him near the far end of the hallway, speaking with a group of officers. His back was to her, but she could tell from the way the others were looking at him that he was the center of attention. She walked toward him, her footsteps purposeful. When he turned and saw her approaching, he stiffened slightly, but his face remained impassive. "Officer Turner," Rachel said calmly, her voice carrying across the hallway. Jack looked at her for a moment, then nodded curtly. "Chief, we need to talk," Rachel said, her tone firm but not hostile. Without waiting for a response, she gestured for him to follow her into her office. Jack hesitated for a moment before walking behind her. As they entered her office, the door closed softly behind them. Rachel turned to face him, her eyes steady. "I've been informed that you've been ignoring the new directives I set for this department," she said, her voice calm but authoritative. Jack didn't respond immediately, his jaw tightening as he stared at her. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "I've been doing this job longer than you, Chief. I know what works." "And what works, Officer Turner?" Rachel asked, her voice still calm. "Ignoring the policies that are meant to ensure fairness, equality, and proper conduct?" Jack's eyes narrowed. "You don't understand the realities of this job, Rachel. You think you can just come in here and change everything without understanding the consequences." Rachel took a deep breath, her patience wearing thin. "I understand more than you think," she said softly. "I understand the responsibility I have, and I understand that the old ways won't work anymore." Jack's gaze shifted, his eyes flicking to the door, but he didn't say anything. Rachel could feel the weight of the tension in the room, but she wasn't about to back down. This was her department now, and she was going to make sure that everyone, no matter how long they'd been there, understood that things had to change. It had been a few days since Rachel's conversation with Officer Turner, and while things had settled down for the moment, the tension was far from gone. She could feel the change in the air every time she walked through the department, the subtle whispers, the sideways glances. Some officers were supportive, eager to embrace the new direction she was leading, but others, like Turner, were clearly resistant to the changes she was trying to bring. Rachel wasn't naive. She knew this wasn't going to be an easy road, but she also knew she couldn't afford to let up. The first few weeks in her new role had been a whirlwind of meetings, reports, and planning, but now it was time to make her mark. She spent her evenings reviewing department protocols and reaching out to community leaders to discuss how she could improve the relationship between the police and the public. There's a lot of work to be done, but Rachel was used to hard work. She knew it wasn't going to happen overnight, but every step forward was a victory. The following Monday, Rachel called a department-wide meeting. It was time to address the entire force, to let them know who was in charge and what she expected from them moving forward. As she stepped into the briefing room, the room fell silent. Officers of all ranks were seated, their eyes focused on her. There was an energy in the room, a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and, for some, outright resistance. Rachel took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment, but she was ready. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice calm but firm. "As your new chief, I want to make one thing very clear. We are here to serve and protect the community, and we will do that with respect, fairness, and integrity." The room was quiet. Rachel could feel the eyes of the officers on her, waiting for her to elaborate, to give them more. "I know some of you may have doubts about the changes I'm making," she continued, "and that's okay. But I want you to understand something. Change is necessary. We can't keep doing things the way they've always been done. We need to adapt. We need to be better." A few murmurs spread through the room, but Rachel kept her focus. "I expect each one of you to uphold the highest standards of conduct, both on and off duty. This department will not tolerate discrimination, misconduct, or any form of bias. If you can't follow these standards, then this job may not be the right fit for you." There was a pause as Rachel let her words sink in. She knew this wasn't going to be an easy sell, but she wasn't backing down. As she spoke, she noticed a few officers exchanging glances, including Turner, who was sitting at the back. His arms were crossed tightly over his chest, his face unreadable. She had expected this. Jack Turner wasn't the type to accept change quietly. He had spent years building his reputation in the department, and the idea of someone like Rachel coming in and challenging the status quo didn't sit well with him. But Rachel wasn't concerned about that. She knew she had the support of the community, and she knew that the work she was doing was important. The department needed leadership that was focused on fairness, justice, and accountability. And she was going to provide that leadership, no matter how much resistance she faced. "I'm not asking for perfection," Rachel said, her voice strong. "What I'm asking for is commitment. Commitment to the people we serve. Commitment to each other as a department. And most importantly, commitment to doing the right thing, even when it's hard." There was a shift in the room. Some officers nodded, and Rachel could sense the walls beginning to crack. The resistance was still there, but it wasn't as strong. This was her moment, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. After the meeting, Rachel walked back to her office, her mind racing with the next steps. She knew that the road ahead would be filled with challenges, but she was more determined than ever. As she passed by Turner's desk, she caught his eye. For a brief moment, there was no animosity, no anger. Just a quiet acknowledgement. Rachel didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her actions would speak louder than any words ever could. It had been 2 weeks since Rachel's department-wide meeting, and while the dust had settled somewhat, the challenges were only beginning. She could feel the shift in the department. The officers who had once silently supported the status quo were now looking to her for guidance. But the deep-seated resistance from some, especially from Officer Jack Turner, was becoming more apparent. Turner was still holding his ground, his insubordination less overt but still present. His refusal to follow some of the new protocols Rachel had implemented was no longer something she could ignore. But it wasn't just about Jack anymore. It was about the department as a whole, and how to get everyone on board with the changes she was trying to make. One morning, as Rachel sat at her desk going through the latest reports, she received a call from Lieutenant Marcus Grant. "Chief, we need to talk," Marcus said, his voice tense. Rachel's heart sank. She had known something was coming, but she wasn't sure what. "What's going on, Marcus?" she asked, her voice steady. "It's Turner," Marcus replied. "He's been causing trouble again. This time, he's gone so far as to publicly question your leadership during a briefing." Rachel felt a wave of frustration, but she didn't let it show. She had expected as much, but the fact that Turner was now openly challenging her leadership was a problem. "Where did this happen?" she asked. "In front of the whole team during roll call," Marcus answered. "He made a comment that he didn't think you were qualified for the position, and that some of the changes you've been making are unnecessary." Rachel exhaled slowly, trying to process the information. This was more than simple insubordination. Turner was undermining her authority in front of the team, and that could not stand. "Thank you for letting me know," Rachel said, her tone calm but firm. "I'll take care of it." When the call ended, Rachel sat back in her chair and took a deep breath. She knew this day would come. She had to deal with Turner directly. The next morning, Rachel called for another meeting, this time just with her leadership team. She needed to address the situation head-on before it could escalate any further. As the officers filed in and took their seats, Rachel's gaze briefly landed on Jack, who was already there, looking as though he didn't care for the upcoming discussion. She could feel the tension in the room, but she wasn't about to back down. She started the meeting with a few words about departmental progress, but she could tell that Jack's mind wasn't fully there. She could feel his resistance like a weight pressing down on the room. Finally, she turned her attention directly to him. "Officer Turner," she said, her voice steady, "I've been informed that you've been questioning my leadership in front of the team. Is that true?" Jack's expression didn't change, but Rachel could see the flicker of defiance in his eyes. "I don't think it's any secret that I have some issues with the direction you're taking this department," Jack replied coolly. "I've been in this department a lot longer than you, Chief. I know how things should be run." Rachel stood tall, not backing down. "I understand that you've been here longer than I have, officer. But that doesn't mean we can't evolve. We can't keep doing things the same way, especially if it's not working for the community we're supposed to serve." Jack didn't respond immediately, but Rachel could see his jaw tighten. She wasn't expecting him to agree with her, but she needed him to understand one thing. This was her department now, and she would lead it her way. "If you have concerns about the changes I'm making," Rachel continued, "then I'm open to discussing them. But questioning my leadership in front of the team, especially in such a public way, is not acceptable. I expect better from you, Officer Turner." There was a long pause. Jack's eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment, Rachel wasn't sure how he would respond. But then, to her surprise, he spoke. "I don't agree with you, Chief, but I'll follow your orders." Rachel nodded, acknowledging his reluctant compliance. It wasn't the resolution she had hoped for, but it was a start. The road ahead would still be filled with challenges, but at least she had taken a step toward asserting her authority. She wasn't going to let Jack Turner, or anyone else, undermine her leadership. As the meeting continued, Rachel's thoughts briefly shifted. She had no illusions about the battle still ahead, but she was more determined than ever. Change was happening, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. It had been a few weeks since the confrontation between Rachel and Officer Turner, and the atmosphere in the department was slowly beginning to shift. While Jack was still far from being a fan of the new direction, his compliance with the orders was a step in the right direction. Rachel had expected resistance, but what she hadn't anticipated was how much of it would come from her own officers, particularly those who had been with the department for years. Despite the changes she had been trying to implement, there were still murmurs of discontent behind closed doors. Rachel knew that she would have to continue pushing, but she couldn't do it alone. She needed allies, and she was beginning to find them in unlikely places. Lieutenant Marcus Grant, who had been one of her earliest supporters, had become a trusted confidant. He had proven himself to be an invaluable resource, offering insights and advice on how to handle the more challenging members of the team. "Chief, I think you should know that Turner has been getting more vocal behind your back," Marcus said one afternoon as they sat in her office, reviewing the latest reports. He's talking to some of the officers, trying to sway them against the changes. Rachel exhaled slowly. She wasn't surprised, but it still stung to hear. "What are they saying?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "It's not just Turner," Marcus replied. "There are a few others who feel the same way. They're questioning your decisions, saying that some of the new policies are too extreme, that they don't fit with the realities of policing." Rachel could feel the weight of those words. The realities of policing, she repeated softly, the irony not lost on her. She had heard that excuse many times before, and it had always been used to justify the status quo. "What's the next step?" "We need to keep pushing," Marcus said. "We need to get more of the younger officers on board, the ones who are open to change. They're the future of the department." Rachel nodded, appreciating Marcus' insight. She knew he was right. The younger generation of officers had grown up in a different world, one where issues like racial bias and community policing were no longer ignored. They were ready for change. It was just a matter of giving them the tools and the support they needed to implement it. The next day, Rachel gathered a small group of the younger officers for a private meeting. She needed to know where they stood, and if they were willing to support her in her efforts to reshape the department. As they sat around the table, Rachel could sense their hesitation. They were nervous, unsure of how to speak out in the face of such entrenched opposition from their more senior colleagues. But Rachel wasn't going to let that stop her. "I know change is hard," she began, her voice steady but encouraging. "But I'm asking for your support. We're working to build a department that reflects the values of fairness, equality, and accountability. This isn't about me. It's about all of us working together to make things better." One of the younger officers, Officer Laura Green, spoke up. "We're with you, Chief," she said. "We want to see change, too. We want to make a difference." That was all Rachel needed to hear. The rest of the meeting was filled with discussions on how to strengthen their efforts, how to engage more officers, and how to begin shifting the culture from within. As the meeting ended, Rachel felt a renewed sense of determination. She knew the road ahead would be long, and she knew that Turner and others like him would continue to challenge her at every turn. But she also knew that she wasn't alone. There were allies within the department, officers who believed in what she was trying to do. And as long as she had their support, she could keep pushing forward. Later that afternoon, Rachel walked by Jack Turner's desk. He didn't look up as she passed, but she could feel his eyes on her. She didn't acknowledge him, not because she was avoiding him, but because she knew there was no need to. She had made her position clear, and she wasn't going to let anyone, not even Turner, derail her vision for the future. She had a department to lead, and she would do it on her terms. It had been months since Rachel's arrival as police chief, and while there were still many challenges ahead, she could feel the change beginning to take root. The department was slowly adjusting to the new policies, and even though some officers, like Turner, remained outwardly resistant, there were signs of progress. More officers, particularly from the younger generation, were speaking out in support of her leadership. It was a start, but Rachel knew that lasting change didn't happen overnight. It required constant vigilance, patience, and, most of all, consistency. One morning, as Rachel walked through the department, she noticed a few officers chatting near the break room. They were talking in low voices, but when they saw her approaching, the conversation quickly stopped, and they scattered. It was a small thing, but it told her everything she needed to know. The fear of speaking openly, especially when it came to her leadership, was still very much present in the department. But that was something Rachel was determined to change. Over the next few weeks, she continued to focus on her efforts to engage the officers. She held regular meetings with her leadership team to address concerns, offer support, and discuss strategies for improving the department's relationship with the community. She also made an effort to meet with local community leaders, working to bridge the gap between the police and the people they served. One afternoon, after a particularly long meeting with the mayor's office about community outreach programs, Rachel received a message from Lieutenant Marcus Grant. "We need to talk," it said. Rachel immediately dialed his number. "What's going on, Marcus?" she asked when he picked up. "It's Turner," Marcus said, his voice low. "He's been making waves again. Rachel felt a surge of frustration, but kept her voice steady. What's he done this time? He's been stirring up trouble with some of the officers, Marcus explained, talking about how the department is changing too quickly and how we're losing touch with the real issues. It's the same rhetoric, but now he's trying to get others on his side. Rachel's grip on the phone tightened. She had hoped that Turner's opposition would fade with time, but it was clear that he wasn't going to back down easily. What do you suggest we do? Rachel asked, already preparing for another confrontation. I think it's time we address it head on, Marcus said. You can't let this go on any longer. He's challenging your authority, and it's affecting morale. Rachel didn't hesitate. You're right. I'll take care of it. That evening, Rachel called a meeting with Turner. She wasn't sure how this conversation would go, but she knew it had to happen. When Turner walked into her office, his usual expression of indifference was replaced by something more guarded, as if he knew what was coming. Officer Turner, Rachel said, her tone measured, I've been hearing things that concern me. Turner remained silent, waiting for her to continue. You've been talking to other officers about my leadership. You've been questioning the changes we're making. Is that true? Turner's eyes met hers, his jaw tight. I'm just speaking the truth, he said, his voice clipped. The truth as you see it. Rachel replied calmly. You've made it clear you don't agree with the changes, and I understand that. But your method of handling it is what concerns me. You're sowing division, and that's not acceptable. Turner opened his mouth to respond, but Rachel raised a hand, cutting him off. I've heard enough. Here's the reality. I'm the chief. These changes are happening, and I'm not backing down. You can either get on board and work with me, or you can continue to resist and find yourself out of place here. Turner's gaze flickered, but he didn't say anything. Rachel took a deep breath and continued. You've been here a long time, and I respect that. But this department is evolving. I need officers who will support that evolution, not fight against it. There was a long pause. Turner looked at her, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. I'm not going anywhere, but I don't have to agree with everything you do. Rachel nodded. I'm not asking you to agree with everything, Turner. I'm asking for respect, and I'm asking you to put the department above your personal opinions. Turner didn't respond. Rachel could tell he was still processing, but he wasn't giving up. She had made her point. We're done here, she said firmly. I expect you to do your job, and if you can't, there will be consequences. As Turner left her office, Rachel felt a sense of resolution settle over her. This was just another step in the journey, but she wasn't going to let anyone undermine her. Not Turner, not anyone. She had a vision for the future of this department, and she was going to see it through. It had been several months since the intense conversation between Rachel and Officer Turner, and while the department was making progress, Rachel knew that she was far from being out of the woods. Turner had not made things easy for her, but the department's transformation was starting to gain momentum. With each passing day, Rachel felt the weight of her role as chief more heavily. The expectations were high, and the resistance to her leadership had not completely subsided, especially from long-serving officers like Turner. But there were victories, too. More of the younger officers were speaking out in support of her, pushing for change, and rallying behind the values she was trying to instill in the department. Rachel's days were packed with meetings, paperwork, and discussions with various community groups. But there was one issue that still weighed on her mind, the lingering tension with Turner. Despite his reluctant compliance, Rachel knew that as long as Turner harbored his resentment, the department would never fully unite. But she couldn't force him to change. He had to come to terms with the new direction on his own. Or so she hoped. One day, as she walked into her office, she was greeted by an unexpected sight. Turner was standing outside her office, his expression unreadable. At first, Rachel considered just walking past him, but something told her this was a conversation she couldn't ignore. Officer Turner, she said, her voice calm but firm, what can I do for you? Turner hesitated, his eyes flickering for a moment. He shifted on his feet before speaking. I've been thinking, he said slowly, about what you said a while ago. Rachel raised an eyebrow, but remained silent, waiting for him to continue. About the department needing to evolve, he continued, his tone less defensive than usual. I think I've been holding on to the past too much. I'm not saying I agree, with everything you've implemented, but I'm starting to see that maybe some of it's for the better." Rachel was taken aback by his admission. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. She had expected more pushback, more resistance, not this sudden acknowledgement. "I appreciate you saying that," she replied after a pause, her voice softer than usual. "It's not easy, and I know it's been hard for a lot of people, including you. But I'm glad you're starting to see the bigger picture." Turner gave a small nod, but didn't speak right away. He stood there for a moment, clearly wrestling with something. Finally, he spoke again. "I still don't agree with everything," he said, "but I'll follow your orders. I'll try to make it work." It wasn't the full endorsement Rachel had hoped for, but it was a significant step forward. For the first time, Turner wasn't outright rejecting her leadership. He was willing to work with her, even if he didn't fully agree with the changes she was pushing. "That's all I can ask for," Rachel said. "We don't have to agree on everything, but we do have to work together." As Turner turned to leave, Rachel couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. This was a breakthrough, even if it was small. She knew that she still had a long road ahead of her. There were more challenges to face, more resistance to overcome, but this was progress. Turner's shift in attitude, however subtle, was a sign that things were moving in the right direction. Rachel spent the next few days continuing to build relationships within the department. She reached out to more officers, listening to their concerns, offering support, and reinforcing the importance of the changes she was making. The feedback she received was encouraging. Officers who had once been skeptical were now beginning to see the benefits of a more community-focused approach to policing. Despite the hurdles she had faced, Rachel knew she was on the right path. She had proven to herself and to the department that she was capable of leading through adversity. The road ahead was still uncertain, but with every step she took, Rachel felt more confident in her ability to shape the future of the department. Her leadership was beginning to take root, and she was determined to see it through, no matter how long it took.